Hey guys, I just wanted to make you a quick video about the next body system that we are going to cover in advanced anatomy. And that body system is the lymphatic system. Now, if you look here, I always kind of do this at the very beginning so everybody knows where I'm at. I am on Class Kick slide number 33. Slide 34 I'll talk about in just a minute. Erase that arrow so it's not just permanently there. I do want to show you that, I'll zoom out and show you that I have some slides here from your chapter notes. It makes it a little bit easier for me to talk through this with you. And then down here at the bottom of once again, slide number 33, just calling it out again for you. Down here at the bottom of slide number 33, I do have your assignment for this week. So your assignment is down here, right, we use yellow, right down here. And I will be talking about that in a little bit, but I did want to start by saying I have your assignment down here on the bottom of slide number 33. And it does say to post photos to slide 34 when you're done. And that is the slide that I would like for you to turn this in on. We don't need to spend time on this now because I am trying to make this short and to the point so you can get started on this assignment right here. Again, the assignment is on the bottom of slide 33. And that assignment is the assignment for this week. Also, if you notice here, I know I asked you guys last week to go ahead and define terminology week 11. We will start terminology again, again next week. And we will be having our quiz over week 11 next week. We'll probably just do terminology next week, and we'll do the lymphatic system this week, and then we'll just kind of keep on that schedule until we're done with terminology. But the good news is we only have week 12 left to go after next week, so that is awesome. Get those yellow lines out of here. Nobody likes yellow anyway. Okay. Let's go up here and kind of talk about the lymphatic system. Here is actually a picture of the lymphatic system, and I don't usually start with these kinds of pictures, but I'm going to for this chapter because a lot of you don't know what the lymphatic system is. The lymphatic system is all these green lines and all these green masses of tissue. See these masses of tissue? And see all these green lines. I know I just made it pink, but pink's better than green anyway. But that is collectively all this green, the green circles and the green lines. Collectively, that is the lymphatic system. Now, the lymphatic system is really, really, really awesome because it has two really important functions. And I'm going to start by writing those functions right here. The first one, and this is probably something you didn't even know, is that the lymphatic system returns fluid. And it actually returns fluid back to your blood. And if you remember from maybe last year in anatomy, especially you seniors out there, juniors, we'll talk about this later, but blood is the only fluid tissue in the human body. And by fluid, I mean that that's the only tissue that flows. It flows through your body. It is pushed by your heart. And there is lots of pressure behind it caused by the pumping of the heart. So that's just a little bit about blood, but sometimes fluid leaks out of the blood, and the blood doesn't flow like it's supposed to flow. And what happens is that blood or that fluid will leak out, and it'll just hang out around your cells. So the lymphatic system, all these channels and canals and everything, return that fluid that leaks out of the blood back to the blood. So that the blood can continue to flow. Also, the thing that causes blood to flow is the fact that it has a whole bunch of water in it. So that's just another plug to drink a lot of water and keep your body hydrated. It encourages like substances to move in and out of your blood and in and out of your cells, and that's always a good thing. So the lymphatic system returns fluid to the blood. Secondary function, and this is something that's really, really, really important right now. The secondary function of the lymphatic system is immunity. So when we talk about immunity, if you remember the very beginning of this year, we talked about the 11 body systems. The 11 body systems, and the immune system was actually not one of them. Immunity is the responsibility of the lymphatic system. So all these little lymph nodes here, all these like circles here with the like canals or vessels coming out of them, those are something called lymph nodes. And lymph nodes are like jails for bacteria. They're like, get in here, bacteria, you're in trouble, we're going to get you. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, lymph nodes, you also have some organs that are part of your lymphatic system that don't really belong to another body system. So they are part of the lymphatic system, like your tonsils, your spleen. The spleen is located, or the spleen is listed right there. Your spleen, your tonsils. There's these really cool things called Peyer's patches that are around your intestines that actually absorb bacteria from the fluid that's around your intestines so that it doesn't get put back into your blood. So anyway, we'll talk about immunity in a minute, but I want to talk about the lymphatic system. Let me just review really quick just to make sure that we stay on track. Remember, the lymphatic system consists of lymphatic vessels, and then it says lymphoid tissues and organs. So that would be things like your lymph nodes and things like your tonsils. So there are some organs, and then there are also all these lymphatic vessels. Those are the green things that are over there on that first picture we looked at. All those green things, those are lymphatic vessels. So if I asked you, or somebody else asked you, what's the anatomy of the lymphatic system, you would say like the lymphatic system consists of lymph nodes and other lymph organs, and then the lymphatic vessels. Here, just as a quick review, we kind of covered this part right here, over there, but the lymphatic system transports fluid back to the blood and then helps with immunity. And another word for immunity is body defenses. So, and resistance to disease. That's a big thing going on right now as well. But let's talk about why fluid is a problem. So, if we look here, if you remember from maybe chapter 10, if you're in regular anatomy at the same time as this class, we haven't gotten to this yet, but you can still understand. We have this red structure right here, and that is just representing an artery. So this red one right here is an artery. Now, this blue one over here is representing a vein in your body. So if you look, I'm going to make all this coloring go away because we don't need it now that you know what is what. So what happens is if the vessel is drawn in red, that means that it has lots of oxygen in it and lots of nutrients in it that are ready to be distributed to the cells in the capillary beds. And then if it's drawn in blue, like this one over here, that means it has lots of carbon dioxide in it and it's nutrient low, because it already gave all those good things like oxygen and nutrients. It already gave those to the cells that it was around in the capillary beds. So what happens here is this is blood, like this right here is blood coming out of your heart and going to your body here. And then this blood over here is going into this vein and going back to your heart to be pushed back to the lungs so it can like pick up oxygen again. This structure in the middle is really important. This is representing a capillary bed. Now, if you remember back to like the respiratory chapter, capillaries are only one cell layer thick, so oxygen and nutrients can diffuse in and out. And then remember we were talking about like the alveoli, and the alveoli are only one cell layer thick. Well, that's the exact same thing that's happening here. This would actually be like internal respiration. So like internal respiration is happening in this center part here, but something else is happening that makes the lymphatic system super important. The other thing that's happening is this blood, I need to change colors. Okay, this blood that's flowing through here is under a lot of pressure. And when it gets into these tiny capillaries, that's when the good stuff happens, like the oxygen diffuses out and the carbon dioxide diffuses in. And if you kind of look in the background here, you can see cells here. And something else you can see here is all this space. This space out here is called interstitial space. And interstitial space is just a nice way to say space between the cells. So interstitial space is just this space between the cells. Now, oxygen and carbon dioxide are diffusing in these little tiny capillaries and into the cells, and this blood that's flowing through here is under lots of pressure. And when it gets down here to these tiny capillaries, where the magic happens, and that's where diffusion happens, sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, we'll go with blue. Well, let's go with this color. Okay, so what happens is fluid leaks out as well as the good stuff like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Fluid leaks out. And the cells don't need that extra fluid. So what happens is all that extra fluid hangs out and can accumulate in the interstitial space. So when this fluid leaks out in these capillary beds that are all over your body, it starts to fill up these spaces between the cells. And if you remember a couple weeks ago, we had a medical terminology word, and that word was edema. And edema means swelling. So what happens is this fluid leaks out and fills up all these interstitial spaces. And if your lymphatic system isn't working appropriately, then you get like unnecessary water retention and swelling, because the lymphatic system is not soaking up all this extra fluid and returning it back to your blood. So what happens then is the lymphatic system says, hey fluid, you can't hang out here. You need to get back in the capillaries, and you need to get back up to the heart and back in the blood. So if we look right here, we actually have, I wrote this earlier so I would remember to tell you, they used to think the ends of these lymphatic system, or these lymphatic vessels, they used to think they were like open like straws and the fluid just jumped back in them. But what happens instead is all this fluid is out here, and these little vessels, these little lymphatic vessels, this green thing right here, they have like little tiny trap flap doors on them. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here. And when the pressure increases out here from all this fluid, it pushes those trap doors open, and the fluid flows into the lymphatic vessel. So if you look here, they're actually closed at the top. They used to think they were open, but they're actually closed. And what happens is as this fluid builds up in here, it pushes these little valves open, and the fluid flows into the lymphatic vessel. And then your skeletal muscles contract all the time because you're moving around. And that's what pushes the fluid all the way back up to the subclavian vein. So all this fluid is collected all over your body, and it's pushed by the action of your skeletal muscles all the way back up to the subclavian vein. And all that fluid empties into the subclavian vein, which I don't know why this is not on here, empties directly into your heart. And that's what gets that fluid back to your heart so that your blood stays flowing. And so that you do not get edema, because that would be super bad. So, oh, I wanted to tell you guys too. Let me make all this stuff go away, and then I'll draw it again. Okay, so as this fluid builds up here, it pushes these little trap doors, these little valves open, and the fluid goes in. But when it builds up in here, when all the fluid goes in here, it pushes the doors back shut. So the fluid has to stay in there. So like this whole thing right here depends on fluid pressure. Like the pressure of the fluid and where there's more pressure. So if there's more pressure out here, it pushes this valve in, and the fluid flows in here. And once the pressure builds up in here, it pushes that valve back closed, and the fluid gets stuck in here, and then there's nowhere for it to go but down the vessel. So it's really cool because it's a passive process. So this is a passive process. It does not require ATP. It works off the skeletal muscles to push it back up to the subclavian vein. And then the fluid going into the vessel itself is also passive, because you have these awesome valves all over these. Hey, just to put this into perspective for you as well, because it's kind of hard to tell by this magnified picture, a lymphatic vessel is like the size of a coffee stirrer straw. Like that's how big one is. They're really, 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 really tiny. Also, there's these little filaments that connect it to the tissue around it so that it stays in place. So it can't like move, and then you end up with, maybe your ankle swollen because your lymphatic vessel moved. So these little filaments that come off of here, they are kind of like anchors to anchor it to the surrounding tissue so they can't move. Let's see what else we have here. Let's review, make sure I covered everything. Okay, so the fluid is referred to as, why would I pick that color? Let's go with this color for now. Okay, so the fluid that's being carried back to your subclavian vein, that is referred to as lymph. So all this fluid that builds up in the interstitial space, that's called lymph fluid. So it's the fluid that the lymphatic system carries around. properties of lymphatic vessels, they only move in one way. They actually look like, I don't know if I have a picture of it, but they kind of look like this. I'm not the best artist. They kind of look like this. And as fluid gets pushed up here, if it tries to go backwards, it ends up, let's use a different color. As fluid gets squished up by your skeletal muscles, so you'll have skeletal muscles running here and here. So you have skeletal muscle fibers, and as they work and move, the fluid gets squished up here, and then maybe they relax, then the fluid kind of like drains back down into here until the next push, until it's propelled to the next one. So these vessels have like these little, like this little valve system where they're pushed, and then if the fluid, like if the contraction lets off, the fluid kind of just pools down in here, and then the next push sends it up further on its way back to the subclavian vein. If we look at this picture right here, this is showing your heart. Finally, there's a picture with your heart on it. This would be like, as you can see, the arteries leave the heart and take like the good blood all the way down here to the capillary beds. And this is where that fluid leaks out. Uh-oh, fluid leaked out. And then the lymphatic system soaks it all up and sends it all the way back up to the subclavian vein. And you can see like the blood is in here going back to the heart. And then this main lymphatic duct empties into the subclavian vein, and it joins the blood again. Now, you can also see something else we didn't talk about yet. See all these like circle-y things on here on the way back? Those are all lymph nodes, because when fluid, let's go back to a different picture because it's easier to see. See all this fluid that leaked out of the blood? Well, the other thing that happens is sometimes bacteria, that's not a good color. Let's use, I don't know, no. Let's use dark orange. Okay, sometimes bacteria leaks out too. I'm making them bees because they're bad. Sometimes bacteria leaks out too, and bacteria hangs out in this fluid. Or maybe some viruses are hanging out here. Or maybe, I don't know, we'll just go with bacteria. Okay, so they leak out into the interstitial space too from the blood, and then the lymphatic system soaks them up. And there's like this check and balance system all the way back to the heart. So as this lymphatic system is, oh yeah, here's my valves. That's what I was trying to draw over here. So there you go. As this lymphatic fluid or this lymph is traveling all the way back up to the subclavian vein, it's going through these little lymph nodes. And these lymph nodes, located pretty much everywhere. Remember, everywhere? Look up here. They're everywhere. If you've ever had swollen lymph nodes on your neck, here's why. If your doctor is ever like feeling your neck when you like have a cold or something like that, he's trying to see if you have infection in your body collected by your lymph nodes, because lymph nodes are awesome. What they do is, as this lymphatic fluid that was collected from all around your cells that leaked out of the blood, well, some of it is good fluid and some of it is bad bacteria. And what lymph nodes do is they pretty much quarantine the bad bacteria. And they recognize the bad bacteria, and they do one of two things. They either eat it, which destroys it, or they signal WBCs, and you should know what that is. That's white blood cells. And then the white blood cells come in there and destroy it. So all these lymph nodes, whenever they find bad bacteria in the lymphatic system, they pretty much quarantine it in your lymph nodes. And if you have an infection in your body, that's what causes your lymph nodes to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because they're pretty much jails for this bad bacteria. And this bad bacteria has to hang out there because it's quarantined there until there is a cell called a macrophage, macrophage, and macro means big, and phage, if you remember, this means to eat or destroy. So they literally eat or destroy the bacteria. That's what they do. So they're pretty much quarantined in here until the macrophages eat them or destroy them, or the white blood cells come and destroy them as well. So either of those two things happen. But that's how the lymphatic system and immunity work together. So it's kind of like that fluid's flowing back there anyway, and these are all little jails along the way that it has to go through, and they end up filtering the fluid, so it's perfectly good, for the most part, what they can recognize to go back into your heart. So that is, let me make sure I covered everything. I talked about edema. I talked about terminology. Lymph, it's excess fluid. Are you kidding? Okay, let me start this back up. Cross your fingers, it's fast. Thanks, Class Kick. All right, there we go. Almost back in business. So I hope you guys are doing really good while this is reloading, if it ever reloads. My apologies for this. Try one more time. Come on, Class Kick. I think we're pretty much done anyway. I'm just waiting for it to load again. Really long pause. There we go. Okay, we're almost back in business, guys. There we go. All right. So we talked about lymph. We talked about lymphatic vessels. We said it goes to the heart. There's no pump, but there is valves. Remember, it goes one way. And skeletal muscles move it there. Okay, we did talk about that. We did talk about edema, so that's check. We did talk about terminology being next week, so that's good. I did want to take just 2 seconds to talk about your assignment for, if you want to do it today, great. If you want to do it tomorrow, great. But this is part of your weekly e-learning. So I would like for you to make a model, a model of a lymphatic vessel. And when you make a model of a lymphatic vessel, I would like you to make sure that you label the following: the vessel itself, the cells of the tissue that are around the vessel. So in other words, if you have this being the vessel, you would have cells around it. I want you to label the interstitial space in your model. I would like you to show me what you're using for lymphatic fluid. I also want you to show the lymphatic fluid entering the vessel. You need to include many valves that only open one way, just like a lymphatic vessel does. Make sure you include those little filaments that hold, and make sure you label those filaments that hold it to the surrounding connective tissue. And then I would also like you to show the fluid going into the vessel and what causes the valves to open and close. So if we go back to maybe this picture, remember when we were talking about the fluid and going into the vessel? That's what I would like for you to show. Now, I want you to make a model. That means you need to find some things that represent these things. I change to a different color, that represent like the lymphatic vessel. What can you make a lymphatic vessel out of? I don't want to give you my ideas because I obviously thought about this ahead of time and I was like, ooh, that would be a good one. But I don't want to say it out loud because I want you to think of something. So what around your house could you make a lymphatic vessel out of? What could you make the cells out of around the vessel? What could you use to show fluid? Remember, fluid doesn't have to be, maybe, it doesn't necessarily have to be a liquid. Like, please don't, like, well, I mean, I guess you could do it in the sink. I don't know, I'm just saying. Whatever you want, but I need you to show fluid entering the vessel. Like, something has to be your fluid. Your valves should be on your lymphatic vessel. Your filaments should be on your vessel as well. And then I would like for you to make your model and then post some photos to slide 34, which is the next slide, to turn that in, and make sure you're not going to be able to do it in like one photo. And some of you guys are, I know you, so you're like challenge accepted, but I want you to remember that you have to show things happening. So maybe a couple stills or something like that would work to turn this in. And make sure that you label so that I know that you know what you're talking about. If you forget what I said, or if you're having a hard time getting started with this, I did include like a little section from your book that explains what we were talking about up here with lymphatic fluid and interstitial space and all that kind of stuff. So I did include this for you. And as always, if you have any questions, make sure you email me. I'm just sitting around making videos. So let me know if you need any help, and have a good night. Thanks.